All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here amongst so many innovators and thinkers throughout the hall and leaders shaping the future of AI. I'm Mark Montgomery. I'm the Senior Director of the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And I lead our efforts to enhance U.S. security through technology innovation while trying to counter cyber threats. Previously, I served in the Navy for 32 years, and I worked as the Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission as Policy Director for Senate Armed Services Committee under the late Senator John McCain. I'm really fortunate to be joined by my friend Matt Pottinger, who is the former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, where he played a pivotal role in shaping Indo-Pacific strategy and U.S. policy towards China. Before that, he was a journalist in China for Reuters for a number of years, followed by 3 combat deployments as a U.S. Marine Intel officer. Later on, you can tell me which one was more challenging. And then lastly, we're lucky to have Leah Siskin, who leads AI research at FDD, a real scoop for us. Previously, she was the Deputy Director for the AI Corps at the Department of Homeland Security, and she spent 4 years modernizing government technology with the U.S. Digital Service in the White House. And you can tell me what was worse, DHS or the White House. All right, but let's get to the issue at hand here. AI represents one of the greatest technology leaps of our time, from accelerated medical breakthroughs to enhancing disaster response. And if you go down to the ground floor, you can see the International Committee on the Red Cross here, thinking about AI. Did a podcast with them this morning. To optimizing supply chains, AI has the power to make our societies more efficient and resilient. There have been a lot of great panels here over the last day and a half at the AI Expo that dive deep into these topics. But our discussion today is going to center around how AI in the hands of bad actors is a strategic threat to our national security and some of the things we can do about that. We're going to explore how adversarial powers, really China, but Russia, Iran, and North Korea in the background, are wielding AI against the United States and our allies like Ukraine and Taiwan, South Korea, and Israel. So Matt, we'll just start right off the top with you about the geopolitical AI landscape and about the state of the AI race between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So yeah, of all my combat deployments, the toughest was 4 years at the White House, so, by far. The AI race, people were sort of discombobulated earlier this year when DeepSeek showed that they had done some pretty interesting things, finding shortcuts in essence, ways to more efficiently deliver a powerful AI without an absolute cutting-edge frontier model. And I think that there's a reason that was sort of promoted by China when it was, and that was to try to create the illusion that, that the race is so close that it's almost hopeless for the United States to maintain a qualitative edge on all of this. And I don't think that's actually true. And I think Xi Jinping has done a lot to make my case for me just over the past couple of weeks. If you've been following the news since the Trump administration negotiating team went to Switzerland and came up with sort of an interim agreement that's already unraveling, because Beijing is using as much coercive leverage as it can by withholding rare earths elements from the U.S. manufacturing base. The thing that they're now asking for, the thing that they want to use this coercive leverage to achieve, is an end to the export controls on leading edge semiconductors, which the U.S. Has a lead in designing. The U.S. has privileged access to what TSMC in Taiwan, the leading chip fab, makes. China is not legally allowed to access those chips, and they're having a tough time getting them. So I wanted to make a point right off the bat that China would not be risking the worst and most damaging trade war to its own economy for the sake of chips if it didn't need those chips. Okay, so the U.S. does have a qualitative edge right now. You can debate how many months or years that lead is, but it is a lead. And every month matters, because as this capability takes off and you have compounding gains in AI, the lead is likely to pull away pretty rapidly. So what is China's plans for the AI, right? Beijing is already using AI in very destructive ways beyond its borders, not just in its borders. Within its borders, it's using facial recognition. Isn't it interesting that the first work that China really prioritized for AI was facial recognition, and then applying that to minority populations, and then eventually expanding it to the entire country. It just gives you a sense. It's all about security and coercion. It's all about advancing the power and interests of the Chinese Communist Party. And abroad, Xi Jinping has said that the key battlefield is in the information space. He's just in April, he held a meeting about AI where he called it the front line of the main battlefield in international competition. So he views this as sort of the critical thing that Beijing feels it can't afford to lose this race. And yet, the ways that it's using even the most primitive first generation AI abroad has been in things like TikTok, right? Where the algorithm is addictive. Beijing is able to amplify content that it wants Americans and other people abroad to see. It suppresses content it doesn't want them to see in ways that can really warp public discourse and public perceptions of our own society. So yeah, I don't think it should be a mystery to us in what ways Beijing plans to use AI. Big hint is it's not going to be good for free societies.
I think I could apply that to almost every emerging technology that I would throw on the table with you. Drones, LiDAR. That's great, thanks. Well, Leah, let's say that was a good strategic overview from Matt of where China is going. Can you talk a little bit about the tactics we see adversaries using against us?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking, because there's just so many different use cases we're seeing, and beyond China, looking at all of our foreign adversaries. So while domestically we are very focused on development and then grappling with kind of the ethical issues around AI and regulation, and figuring out whether this is going to be at federal or state level, our adversaries don't give a shit. They're focused on weaponizing this and using it against us as fast as possible. And the main areas that we are seeing that happen, it can be kind of boiled down to domestic oppression and surveillance, or attacking democratic institutions. So under the repression and surveillance side, we would of course start with China, because they're absolutely the leader in this space. We talked about a very, very conservative estimate of the number of cameras, surveillance cameras in China that leverage AI for facial recognition, conservatively at 200 million, but it's really hundreds of millions. And China owns 50% of the global market share of surveillance technology. So they're just like absolutely dominating in this space, and they're not using it for good. So everyone knows about the social credit system, and now integrating AI into that, and that factors into the scoring algorithm, and this is used to control citizen behavior. So this can determine what sort of job you can get, or where you can travel, or where you can get a loan. And so, as you mentioned, they use this to profile ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs. They use facial recognition to even identify Uyghur facial characteristics, and they incorporate this into preemptive policing. So it's very dystopian, but it's real, and they're already doing this. But we don't entirely focus on China, because we can also talk about Russia and Iran, and even North Korea. So Russia's also using facial recognition, but they're primarily focused on political activity, so mostly in major cities, and they use it to monitor protests. Of course, they're doing a lot of digital censorship, and so they use AI to kind of target any sort of messages of dissent, anything that's kind of wavering from the party line. And then when they merge AI with their existing cyber capabilities, this is when it becomes really dangerous. And they're also completely capable of controlling the domestic information space, and so you have very little penetration from outside information sources. Lastly, I want to hit on Iran, which is not as sophisticated as the other two when it comes to incorporating AI, but they are still using it. Again, like Russia, in protest control to suppress dissent. They're even using it for hijab enforcement. So when they see kind of women activists in protesting, they'll use that as an easy way to kind of tamp down on political activity. And then, of course, they also have targeted censorship where if a certain hashtag is trending or certain images is going around, they can target that and silence that really quick. So that's kind of what they're doing on the domestic side. Then when it comes to attacking the United States and our allies like Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, very, very active. First and foremost would be in disinformation and influence operations. So this is, for China and Russia, like one area where they absolutely excel is just generating at a massive scale tons of AI, Gen AI content for social media. And it's just very done fast, cheap. It doesn't have to be high quality. The goal is to just flood the zone and overwhelm people with information. So they can do that kind of very cheap, basic layer. And whereas in the past you had single individuals producing content, now you can have a person monitoring an entire network. They can create an entire media ecosystem and create fake experts. And they can just generate so much content. And of course, we all know about AI-generated deepfakes. This can be incredibly impactful, especially when you're looking at a population that doesn't have a high media literacy or AI literacy, like most societies. So I think everyone is probably familiar with the deepfake created by the Russians at the onset of the war with Ukraine of President Zelensky surrendering. So you can imagine in a very closed media environment what an impact that would have. And of course, we've seen that has absolutely come to the United States. FBI put out a warning like 3 weeks ago about a lot of government officials being impersonated with deepfakes. We see it with elected officials and business leaders, and sometimes it's for financial scams, but it's also largely for political influence. I mentioned how AI is just such a force multiplier, so you can, again, where you had individuals doing this work before, now you can command entire networks of bots to just push this information out. And one of the tactics that the Russians have is just finding divisive issues domestically and just pushing on those. Like, what a better way to create chaos and distraction domestically when everyone is squabbling over wedge issues. So they'll find whatever that is and just kind of push that and promote that content. They can also, with AI, create highly personalized or targeted propaganda and figure out what exactly their target is interested in and create kind of bespoke content for that audience. One thing, this is a very specific example, but one thing I wanted to mention was an investigation done recently at FGD by my colleague Max Lesser about these kind of scam Chinese consultancies that are popping up around DC with the explicit goal of inviting recently fired federal employees for interviews. I think this is so horrific because I understand this is like, as a former Fed myself, like this population is very vulnerable right now. They're all struggling in a really competitive job market. And so, they're going to take the interviews they can get. But the point of these interviews is to glean information about the federal government. These companies don't exist. So it's like shocking. People have to be very, very careful. And if you're curious, go to FDD for more information about that. Monty, you probably know more about this, but the Chinese are absolutely integrating AI into wargaming already. They're using it to train commanders. They're using it to kind of run different scenarios, to test their own military systems. Everyone, I'm sure, is also familiar with election interference in general. All of these players have been very active in this space over the past couple of elections, but particularly in 2024, we saw Iran, Russia, and China all very engaged with creating deepfakes, doing AI micro-targeting, all for their different purposes and goals. Another example I want to talk about is It's not always about political interference. Sometimes they're just financial scams. So the North Koreans have had a ton of success with this IT worker scam, where they use AI at every step of the process to get North Koreans employed by American tech companies. So they start by, they'll use Gen AI to create American-style resumes. They'll use filters, video filters, voice filters to get through interviews. And then they'll use Gen AI to produce fake identification documents to actually get employed by these American tech companies. And then they'll use that to steal tech secrets and then use the salaries to fund the North Korean war machine. And this is now a multi-million-dollar business. It's actually extremely successful.
It's good for both sides too, because you got like 5 guys working on the other side, and our boss is like, shit, Fred is good, right? Yeah, and so everyone's winning until you realize that your intellectual property is gone.
Absolutely, yeah, and stealing all our secrets. Lastly, probably one of the largest areas, well, they're all concerning, but another major area of concern is just using AI as a force multiplier to find vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure. Now you can use AI to really advance cyber attacks and just automate vulnerability discovery, which is very, very nerve-wracking. And also, at the end of the day, phishing attempts are still one of the best ways to get access and get information. And now with AI, you can do highly personalized phishing attacks at scale. So it can just be extremely effective. So at the end of the day, open democracies are going to be more susceptible to AI influence operations. We just have to figure out how to balance security and civil liberties, and how do we preserve our values while we counter AI advancement.
No, I'm glad that's a great list of the kind of tactical avenues they have. The one that a couple strike me. One that really strikes me is the idea that a lot of us think about AI, that it's going to be this actual tool that does harm to you. The reality is it's its application in influence operations, particularly in below the level of war, which is where we sit right now in the crisis between the democracy and the axis of aggressors, Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea. We are in a constant influence operations game, except that really only one side's playing. So here comes AI. So before AI, you have a battlefield right now where the aggressors, the authoritarians, do use offensive information operations. For a litany of reasons that are too long for this 45 minutes that are remaining, the U.S. has backed out of that. We've done them poorly. We've violated our core principles of don't affect how the press sees things, or don't affect how Congress sees things, or the American public, and we've backed out of information operations. So you have one side working them hard, and you have the other side generally unarmed. You add into that now an enhancing tool that makes influence operations so much more effective. And you have, authoritarian countries who have absolutely, they're not going to be limited by ethical qualms in the application of that tool. So I think this is going to be very tough for the United States going forward. We're in for some lean times, and to make it just slightly worse, we had an administration that just removed the disinformation shops at State Department, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and FBI. Many of the former employees are speaking here in their new roles. But we got rid of those programs, so they practice it, we don't. AI is making it better, and we've disarmed defensively. This is going to create an imbalance, and deterrent strategy doesn't work when you create this kind of imbalance between the capability and capacity of one side and the other. We're really going to have to work on this. I'm glad but all those tactical scenarios you do add up to the adversary showing its willingness to use AI as a tool. So that's good. The second thing you brought up that makes me worried is the propensity for these tools to get to criminals soon. And if you study this in cyber, the really best
the criminals already have the tools.
Yeah, they have. No, but I mean the really good tools. In other words, if you think about, let's just say something like Stuxnet existed. If it did exist, eventually it did end up in Iranian hands, and eventually it was used against a German firm, right? Because tools can be captured and repurposed. If these I/O tools that nation-state actors develop in their more advanced applications, they'll become available for others to use. And we're seeing this in cyber now. We're seeing criminal actors that have tool sets that are on par with most nation states, maybe not the best Chinese or American tool, but very advanced tools. So this is only going to, for the rest of us who don't have aggressive, defensive IO schemes running, which we don't either right now, but as humans we don't, as small businesses we don't. These IO campaigns can be really tough on us. So something for us to think about is that what you just described can probably only get worse over the next 5 to 7 years, and so that's a real challenge in terms of adversary use of these tools. That was kind of a downer. And that leads into, I think I was going to take a moment here to try to talk about our leadership in this. And I said all that. This is really bad form. I still believe AI has a lot of good. I think all of us, there's like 65 panels going on today on how great AI is, right? It's going to make all our jobs either easier or go away. Your choice, right? It's going to make my wife like me more or less, right? But it's going to make, there is obviously a value to AI. And I think there's a value to countries who share the United States values. That doesn't mean the United States, but countries who share our values about transparency, democracy, rules-based systems, developing those tools. So that kind of leads you to, should you have any rules about AI development and AI tool development? And look, we didn't have many rules to the development of the internet itself. And we wanted entrepreneurship to reign as it rolled out of DARPA, and it did. And we ended up with like Pornhub and 4chan, right? I mean, so this is, there's risk in not having rule sets at the very beginning. So when I think about this, I think that, is there a way we could get some of the guardrails on this? So can we recognize that the content needs to be open, free, let entrepreneurship reign, let the companies who are sponsoring this event, flourish? Yes. Do not, look to Europe for a regulatory model, comma. I think we need to start thinking really hard about physical and cyber security of not just the model weights, but some of the how we protect the intellectual property inside the frontier labs. And the frontier labs are really great at saying, man, we agree, we've got to have good security, got to have good security. You're thinking about writing regulation? Hold on. No. And I think I'm at the point now, and last year we looked at this hard, do we need to at least put in the basics of physical and cybersecurity at the labs, kind of like we do at a different type of lab, a weapons lab or a Department of Energy lab? I'm not saying those securities have been perfect. I think things have been compromised there, but at least we're trying to have physical and cybersecurity around the most important properties. And this, I think it always guarantees that if that's done by the states like us and who share our values, then the first mover advantage, the equivalent of that, the first time we see a new kind of evolution in AI, we'll see it inside the democracies and have an ability to respond and think about it. If we don't, the next deep sink will be something we weren't expecting. And it'll be, well, we weren't expecting that, but I mean, it'll be a level of technology we didn't perceive existed anywhere. And I don't think we're ready for that. And so I kind of think, when I think about U.S. leadership, we should be careful and be humble, not to say Western leadership, or leadership of countries who support our transparent rules-based system. And if we do that, I think we'll be in much better shape. But any thoughts, or am I on the right track?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
You still don't know if FDD hired you or a Chinese LinkedIn system.
Still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, that's enough on that. So I basically talked about a whole lot of problems. I think both of you kind of talked about problems too. Let's talk about what actions we can take against our adversaries, or more importantly, what societies can do to try to find themselves more secure. Matt, what's your take on what we're doing with chips and deals with other countries?
Yeah. Well, look, the Biden administration had come up in its final act with a system for making cutting-edge AI available to trusted friends and allies, most of them literally treaty allies, defense allies of the United States, but also friendly countries that enjoy the rule of law. And then they had a second tier that was countries that we would like to see use AI in ways that advance freedom and prosperity, not to restrict and control their people. And then a third tier of a relatively small number of countries that we would seek to slow them down, prevent them from achieving or even acquiring AI infrastructure that would allow them to move forward. I think with the AI deals that we just saw announced in the Middle East by the Trump administration, and there's a lot that has yet to be fleshed out, you sort of saw the effective collapse of that set of rules to really just two tiers. A few enemy countries that we don't want to get this stuff, and then the rest of the world, it's fine for them to acquire all the many of the chips that they would need to train even the most advanced AI models. So I'm pretty concerned about this because Beijing has shown that it has a great, it's very adept at acquiring chips through transshipment, basically black market channels. And it's easier to shut down when you have sort of a diffusion, AI diffusion regime like I thought the Biden rules were a good start, right? It needed refinement, but not abandonment. The other thing that Beijing's pretty good at doing is setting up shell companies that sign up to use these advanced data centers to train AI models in trusted countries, but these companies pretend to be trusted companies. In fact, they are cutouts for Chinese military-backed and Chinese Communist Party-backed companies. So it's easier to deal with those problems when you had a three-tier system, like what the Biden administration left in place. Now it's going to be quite a bit more challenging. So we can talk a little bit more about that, I think.
I love what you're saying there because I think you're spot on. The idea that we've now got basically the countries, the countries of concern. We're not, the two tiers are now pretty much everyone, and then the countries of concern, which is the normal like China, Russia, South Sudan, North Korea, it's Iran. The problem with this, of course, is that's how we do many things, but not things that are as complex as AI. I mean, the whole idea behind having the tiering systems, I think the Biden administration understood not every country, even our partners, necessarily have the wherewithal to understand a Chinese penetration, like you said, with a state-owned enterprise, or even the legal system to prevent the inappropriate action from happening after you discover it. So they created those tiers. I'm not saying the tiers were perfect, and certainly a new administration has the right to adjust the countries within those tiers. It was fairly unusual, though, to effectively collapse it into pretty much everyone's okay except you 7 people we dislike on everything. And so I think that's a great description of it, and we could talk a little bit more about allies in a bit. We talk a lot about workforce at FTD. I think we have a strong track record in cybersecurity on that, but I'd be interested, based on the background of where you've come from with the AI core at DHS, what are the implications for recruiting and retaining AI talent in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. I could talk about this all day.
About 7 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen a lot of other great panel discussions here that talk about the importance of compute power and building data centers and having energy, and do we have the right innovation ecosystem and all of this. And at the end of, but I have found that a lot of people are leaving out one of the critical pillars here of producing great technology, which is talent. And coming from the federal government, where we certainly had a lot of excellent talent who have unfortunately kind of run, screaming for the hills or been pushed out by DOGE. I consider this a serious critical vulnerability in the federal government right now, because we need this talent in-house. Organizations like the U.S. Digital Service, where I worked for 4 years, and the AI Corps, they worked from years and many, many years to build up a pipeline of talent, to convince the best and brightest talent to come from the private sector into government. This is not something that just snaps right back. especially after all the tumult that we've seen. It's going to be a lot of work and a lot of convincing to get people to come into the federal government. But it is absolutely critical that we do have this level of talent in the government. A lot of people say, listen, we're going to have a leaner government. We're going to contract out everything. That'll be a more effective way to use this technology. But for anyone who has worked in government knows you need to have this kind of talent, this caliber of talent in the federal government in order to procure this type of technology. If you don't have educated people who with deep knowledge of AI, no offense to anyone who works for like a Beltway Bandit kind of company, but like if not, then that's how you end up with Beltway Bandits running all the major contracts, because people inside, they don't know the field well enough to take risks and to try cutting edge new companies that don't have as long of a track record. We have all the systems in place to be able to get this talent. We've got special pay scales. We've got direct hire authority for AI talent. We need a massive cultural change inside to say, no, actually, we really want this talent, and we want to retain them. We're going to do what we can to accommodate this talent, which, as we know, is distributed all around the country. They're not all in DC, so like expecting everyone to move here is unrealistic. There's a lot of things that we can do, but we need to start with kind of the cultural change, I would say.
I think it's a great point. And we were just getting ready to set up the AI Scholarship for Service program. It had been put into law. NSF had moved the money around. That's a program that's funded. It's imagined like ROTC. It's fashioned on a cybersecurity program. We, as a team that created about 25 years ago, and we have 25 years of government employees doing an ROTC-like program, coming into the government, owing 2 or 3 years. It was fantastic. We've had 4,000 or 5,000 government cybersecurity workers that way. We are now building an AI one, and it's been completely derailed by decision making at NSF. No one, I don't even think some people in DOJ would say we don't need AI employees in the government 2, 3, and 4 years from now coming in. Yet, because you kneecap the current employees of a program or the people building it and funding it, there will not be these. We won't have these kind of indentured servitude employees coming in. That's how I saw my ROTC experience in the Navy. It worked out okay, but that was the whole idea, and that program's now at risk. So I'm worried that it's not just they did damage today, but we'll rework it over the next couple of years, get it all right. It's that when you start to take away the seed corn for future government generations 4 or 5 years from now, that's how I'm really worried.
Can I say one other thing on this? It's again, just harping on this idea that we have to have the talent in-house. If not, you're going to end up with a bunch of kind of AI talking heads in government, that people who can kind of talk about it, but they don't really understand it, which is why I'm a big proponent of the U.S. Digital Service model of you need engineers in the government. You need designers, people who study how humans interact with technology, and product managers, people who understand, who can treat these things like products that the public is going to use. You need that kind of talent in the government, not just people who can opine about how we're going to use it.
Or we'll pay a lot of money, because having run a commission, I had to hire people, contractors, and I was shocked. I'd been in military officer my whole time. I really didn't understand how much people cost. But look, I understand a full-time equivalent in the government. You think you're paying someone $100,000, you really pay like $150,000 to make it happen. That's cheap compared to asking Booz Allen or SAIC, and I'm not picking on those companies. They're all consistent. There's an industry standard, but you pay even more when you get one of those people on board paying them $100,000. That's not what you're paying Booz Allen or the other companies. Again, not picking on the company by name, although I guess I just did. Saying it's an industry-wide issue, it's going to be a lot more expensive. And I got to tell you, you pay more. There's more of a premium on unique talent, and that AI is going to, I think, initially is going to be a unique talent that we pay a premium for. This can be really penny wise and pound foolish over the next 5 to 7 years if we're not careful.
The federal government can really compete with those competitive companies because they have mission that can't be beat. Anything you care about, you can come work for the federal government to solve that particular problem. So we had a lot of success in convincing people from, working in Silicon Valley, working at these advanced AI companies, to come into government. So I know we can do it again.
I hope you're right. Coming off a workforce into something very different. Matt, I hadn't thought about this till you brought it up, but the idea of the future of copyright for AI and its outputs, how does that impact this?
Yeah, right now, there are more than a dozen lawsuits that have been filed against AI companies, basically demanding copyright agreements for any data that these models study. And I've been looking at this problem recently because on the face of it, my instinct was to side with the copyright holders, right? I'm a copyright holder. I'm a published author. I've made a living for a big part of my life writing stuff and publishing. But what I think will happen if we allow these court cases to proceed in a way that basically favors the copyright holders is that we simply won't be able to train AI models because you would literally have to have hundreds of millions of copyright agreements for every shred of data that you're trying to use. That's more than all the copyrights that have ever been formally honored in agreement in the history of humanity. So it's not going to work. So I think, and by the way, China, which is training its AI models, it should not surprise people here that China doesn't honor copyrights. So they're accessing all of our copyrighted material to train their models. So might Iran be and others. So I think the way to solve this is that you find a way, you let the models train on any copyrighted material they can get a hold of. I still think that there should be limits on very personal data, your personal healthcare data, especially if it's tied to an identifier of whose healthcare data that is. That should still be off limits. But for copyrighted material that's available in the open space anyway, let the AI models train on that data, but then apply the copyright on what the output is. So in other words, try to protect copyright holders if the AI models are trying to sell stuff that's really just repackaged material, but don't interfere with their ability to ingest all of this public realm data. Otherwise, we're not, we're already at a data disadvantage because we have privacy rights they're not always well enforced. But in China, I remember when I accompanied President Trump in 2017 to China, and at the end of that visit, President Trump had already finished his meetings with Xi Jinping, and he was having his last meeting in Beijing before we flew on to Vietnam. And it was with the now late premier, Li Keqiang, and Li Keqiang was picked to deliver a very hard message to President Trump, and it was, we will inevitably beat you in AI and in high tech because we don't have any protections for anyone's data. The government gets all the data it wants, and in fact, we're collecting facial recognition images and all these sorts of things. And even went on to say, America will provide raw materials to China. It'll basically be a banana republic. You'll sell us soybeans and corn, but you'll be dependent on China for all of high tech for the rest of history. And so that was in 2017, right? So he wasn't wrong that we're at a data disadvantage. So let's not make the disadvantage worse by not allowing our AI models to train on that, on all that data. And like I said at the beginning of this, China is at a disadvantage in computing power. So it does not make sense for the United States to relinquish that edge so that we can help Jensen Huang sell a few more chips. Jensen Huang's allegiance is to his shareholders, his bottom line. The U.S. government has a allegiance to its citizens. And so the U.S. government should not just be a plaything of some guys trying to sell some chips and data centers.
And Jensen Huang from NVIDIA.
From NVIDIA. Yeah.
Thanks. One more thing before we go to questions. I wanted to talk about an element of the national security part of this that we don't talk about enough, and that's the power element. And it's this really interesting dynamic, and you and I were talking about this the other day, that the amount of power we have to bring on, this is electrical grid kind of power, is jaw-dropping. We're going to have to go from about 4 gigawatts right now of our grid, about 3% of our grid right now. And our grid's it doesn't feel like it if you live in Southern California, but among OECD 30, our grid's a stable grid. We run at about 55% of the total national load, or the available load of all our nuclear, coal, natural gas, and renewables. If we're all running at the same moment, we're running at just over 50% of it. Other countries like Taiwan, insanely fragile grid, they're running at 73, 74% of the grid, and that is fragile. We're not. However, right now, data centers are about 3 or 4% of the grid, and they're about to take off. They're going to go from 4 gigawatt now in the next 5, 6, 7 years to about 80 gigawatt. And so you can imagine that there won't be a majority of the grid, but they'll begin to become a plurality of the grid. Well, what's that mean? That means you better bring on large, you need to rapidly bring on large, available, properly located power systems. And there's going to be 2 obvious pushes on this, and both of them have big national security implications. One's natural gas. That's going to be the easiest. Everyone, by the way, wants power in their house. No one wants power in their backyard, right? So you're going to have to be very careful how you do this. But my guess is at data centers, we're going to co-locate a lot of gas turbine plants or liquid natural gas plants. The problem with that is we're already ordering LNG turbines that are delivering in 2031. So, when you have this brilliant idea of building a data center in your county in Tennessee and you're going to do it with an LNG plant, that LNG plant better pre-exist, or you're going to be in a lot of trouble because you're not going to see something for 4 or 5 years. The other choice is got its own limitations. That's nuclear power. Now, nuclear power is pretty kick butt in terms of the amount of megawattage it brings. You can do multiple data centers. However, the last nuclear power plant we built, which was about 4 gigawatt total, Votel, built by Southern Company, only took 22 years, right, from start to finish, right? And the last 2 parts of it took 16 years alone. So these are not feasible timeline deliveries. And when people say, I'll go get a small modular reactor, I operate reactors for the Navy. The kind of reactors that we're going to get anytime in the next 3 or 4 years are the kind of reactors that power me and 20 of the other houses in my block, not a large data center. So I say all this to say that we're going to have a national security dilemma here. Do we build the data centers in friendly countries overseas? In other words, move the data there because it's easier to get the power plant going there? Do we build them here and just go all in on natural gas and, conservationists, be still yourself coal, because that's another easy button? These are tough challenges. We're going to have national security challenges. We're just starting to press LNG for overseas sales. It's key to a lot of our allies and partners like Japan, Taiwan, and European countries. Or do we start to revert it to the United States, for our use? So we don't think about this part, but the AI battlefield, the AI battleground includes the power issue and includes how we deal with our partners, how we deal with and how we deal with domestic issues that integrate into it. There's a lot there, and I think, and the last thing I say is you can actually see 3 different companies, 3 different nuclear power plants that were shutting down: 3 Mile Island, Palisades in Michigan, and 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. I think most of us know that one. Palisades in Michigan, and then a plant in Iowa are probably all going to be restarted by companies seeking data centers to get them going, including I think Microsoft at 3 Mile Island. So this is a pretty big national security issue. It's just kind of snuck in the back door of this, and it's going to have a lot of implications for us. All right, I was told I got a kick here to questions. I think we got a lot of topics on the table there. Hopefully, if you have a question, we have a mic right there. Please tell us who you are.
My name is Jack Polson. I'm an independent national security journalist. So you mentioned earlier that the U.S. had kind of disarmed in information operations. That seems largely to be the case, but one could go to usaspinning.gov. There's a $500 million 5-year contract with General Dynamics Information Technology with JSOC, that one can see this subcontractors like Intrepid, Premise Data, et cetera. And I do have sources that have concerns that it's maybe not so effective, maybe it's micromanaged a little bit, but it seems to me that we've sort of centralized information operations into special ops more than we've fully disarmed. And given that this is all open source information, I'd be curious if you could comment.
So a few thoughts, and then ask Matt if he has anything on this. But I'll say first, there's a difference between spending money on something and doing something, and I'd say the U.S. military is pretty kick-ass at that. We can spend money on things and produce nothing with ease. So I don't doubt that there's a $500 million contract out there. I would doubt if there's $5 million of product out there. And I'll be brutal about this. I look at information operations as overt, where there's a great truth about America and we go tell it. That's called Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. I think almost everybody in this room knows we killed all those. I mean, we're down to basically a sliver of the China service and a sliver of the Persian service. These were 1,600 person organizations down to 100 or 200. They're doing the exact minimum required by the law to breathe, because there's laws that put all these in. The Congress has explicitly told the government to do these things, and the government's not doing them. And it's disgraceful. That's overt. Covert is where we do something, this is into the contracts you're probably talking about, where we tell the truth about America, but you don't know it's us. I wish we were good at that, because I tried to do these campaigns when the Chinese were doing island building in the South China Sea. I couldn't convince our government to pay people to write stories about what a disaster this was to the South China Sea fishing and marine life conditions, which it was. It's destroyed almost everything there. I mean, there'll be 300 stories about a U.S. Navy ship clipping 3 meters of reef off in Hawaii, and 0 stories at the same time about the Chinese destroying the South China Sea. So we can't do you're gonna have to show me a lot of work before I believe a penny that's right. The final thing is clandestine. That's where, and it's not done by the military, it's done by the people, and that's where we say something that's not the truth, and you hopefully don't figure out it's us. And if we're doing that, we're doing a terrible job at it. The Russians have run circles around us. I'll just say, just to know that it does happen, the most famous case is called Operation Denver. You should look it up. The Russians ran the Soviets told a story that Dr. Fauci in the 1980s, had revealed that the United States, it's the same Dr. Fauci, that the United States had concocted HIV in a lab and was intentionally giving it to Africans to kill them. And as a result, the South Africans didn't take the normal precautions associated with HIV/AIDS, and that Soviet maneuver killed hundreds of thousands of, allegedly killed hundreds of thousands of Africans. That may or may not be true. 100%, the ANC, the African National Congress, believed that story for 30 years, and it spoiled U.S.-South African relations. Recently respoiled. But my point on this is I don't think I/O is going on our side, and if it is, we're doing we're not doing a good enough a job that I can see it. We're doing a good enough a job that I can't see it. I'm there.
I would only add that when President Kennedy was in office, he brought in the legendary reporter Edward R. Murrow, who was synonymous with broadcast news, right? He was the one radioing in during the London Blitz, the Nazis bombing. He was the first and most trusted journalist in the age of television that came later. But he provided support for what was then called the U.S. Information Service, right? I mean, it was just trying to get the beauty of our system is that we don't want to lie. It's not legal for the U.S. government to lie, and we don't need to lie because we've got a better story to tell. But right now, we're not even telling the story. We're not telling true stories and trying to get those stories out into the world to compete with the pretty devastating misinformation, disinformation that Beijing, among others, is peddling.
Just to hop on there, yeah, this is unequivocal. This is the most effective area for China and Russia to just flood the zone with disinformation. When we think about the budget for Voice of America, wasn't about $200 million. When you think about the price for the impact, it escapes me why we are destroying one of our best sources of soft power.
Yeah, I'm Bruce McCulley. I'm working on a AI application to the DoD CMC program. But the question I have is, you were talking about the magnitude of the power demands that are going to, the increase in power demands. And that has me wondering if, with all of that additional power dissipation, how is that going to affect climate change? And do you have even a rough order of magnitude estimate about how that would compare with the thermal impact of other sources that we're dealing with?
So it really depends. That's a good question. It really depends on which sources you use, right? If you use nuclear, it's going to have a marginal impact. If you use gas turbine, it'll have some. What I do worry about is we were about to retire 50%, I think 75 or so of our remaining coal factories. Those do contribute. And by the way, I'm talking about the country that's going to, you know, in this competition, that's probably going to be most aware of this and trying their hardest to balance these two. But again, we'll be confronted with this. And I think what we'll do is slow down coal retirements. It's definitely going to slow down nuclear retirements. But again, on the terms of impacting it, the slowing down of coal retirements will have an impact. What does worry me is there is one country who's, you know, doing a world-class building effort on coal plants, and that's China. There's one country trying to get into this, and as they look for data centers, I don't think they're going to sit there and have a, you know, an ethical dilemma over nuclear power versus gas turbines versus coal. They'll build coal. And I also say this about their coal. Their coal is extremely dirty compared to ours. And I mean in terms of the, you know, the post-fire production. So I do worry about this. And by the way, when someone says I'm putting a data center in a less developed country, you're definitely going to feel this because the grid, the existing grid, will not support it. You'll have to bring a new system online. It's not going to be a nuclear power plant. It's probably going to be coal. There's a small chance it's natural gas. Either way, you're going to have this implication. So the short-term answer is it's going to have some effect. The long-term answer is who's building and what they're prioritizing.
And Beijing, you know, this relatively dirty coal, right? It puts off more particulate matter. It releases an enormous amount of mercury into the high atmosphere. That mercury ends up coming down, you know, for a while there's been a warning in the U.S. Great Lakes about mercury that has come down from Chinese coal being burned in China. And then it's absorbed by microbes. It turns into methyl mercury. And then it's consumed by a fish, and then a bigger fish, another one, until you know, it's dangerous for pregnant women to eat fish in U.S. lakes as a result of that. So the good news is we'll be dead of mercury poison before the climate gets too hot. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Pottinger. All right.
My name is Meredith Potter. I'm the executive director of the American Security Fund. Leah, you gave us this really long and really useful list. You know, China does this, Russia does that. I was wondering if you could comment on what they might be doing together, maybe cases where they're comparing lessons learned, tactics that are working, that aren't working. I know some of this is sort of cyber entirely, misinformation, disinformation, but Matt, maybe, you know, I also just think like China and Ukraine, for example, where are they cooperating and what are they learning from that?
Well, there have been a number of meetings and agreements reached that, at least at an unclassified level, I'm not aware of what the substance of those agreements are, but it is for much, much closer intelligence service cooperation between Russia, China, and Iran. Now, we've already seen in the open realm that U.S. ships that have been protecting themselves and commercial traffic from Iranian proxies, notably the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who've been firing ballistic missiles for the first time ever at U.S. warships, as well as cruise missiles and attack drones. The targeting for those missiles have come from Russia and China using their satellites. So if they're willing to, if China's already attacking the U.S. Navy, and they are through proxies, Iran and the Houthis, but providing the real-time satellite analysis to do that, would we really think that they're not going to be sharing tactics on cutting-edge AI? And I think we've even seen evidence of that already too.
So I'd say first, good news, FDD is putting out a monograph on the collaboration between the axis of aggressors, and Brad Bowman's writing the military part, and Annie Fixler, who's here in the back, is writing the cyber part, and you'll see some indications of that. I think it's harder in AI to see it. It's harder in cyber. Like when I go to Brad, he shows me 400 areas where there's an explicit exchange of information like the ones you mentioned. Then you go to the economics person, Elaine Jasinski, she'll show us like 75. And you go to the cyber, it's more in the 20 or 30 range. Because it's harder to prove. You know, if I sell you a weapon and you then put that weapon on your May 9th display, your May Day display, everyone knows you did it. What worries me is that the real crown jewel of Russian technology, which is submarine quieting, is allegedly, Sam Paparo, the admiral who runs PACOM, has said that's being shared between Russia and China. If they're willing to share that, AI is going to be a low-hanging fruit for them to share. So the answer is, I'm sure it's happening. Annie Fixer will tell us in the next couple of months if we can prove it.
I would also add, yes, we can assume it's happening. I would assume that any capability, any new models, any new technology that one has that they will all have and they'll all share. There was a BRICS meeting like 2 months ago in Azerbaijan where they made a pledge that they were going to develop AI together and they're going to collaborate. Apparently they also care about guidelines around ethics too. I think Brazil was probably the only one leading that part of it. But yeah, they're very open about collaborating in AI.
All right, we got time for one more question. Go ahead. I just did that to Michael on purpose, but please.
Hi, my name is Zara. I'm an undergraduate student at Berkeley studying the intersection of engineering and business currently. And what I'm seeing walking around this conference and the nature of the area I'm from is that a lot of companies are developing these ChatGPT style applications. We call them GPT wrappers. Specifically, I saw Palantir develop a GPT wrapper for detecting civilian infrastructure and its use in locating targets and what civilian infrastructure might be near it. Now, the concerns I have with this is some of these companies aren't super transparent about the algorithms behind these GPT wrappers, and two, some cases involve hallucinations where these systems can output false information. And now when we're trying to increase literacy in policy with AI, how should we weigh trust and risk when we're inputting some information that could be not classified, but secure and critical?
That's a great question, and that degree mix is going to make you a lot of money. Smart. Hey, listen, I look at this a lot. Look, you're challenged here, right? You have the transparency, you have the value of transparency, so you can assess the appropriate application of the tool, versus the company's desire to protect their intellectual property and do it. We do this all the time with military companies. So for the military, I think they can fight through this challenge and contractually require it. That doesn't help like an aspiring journalist, to figure out, am I comfortable with this system being used? It does help the military. And then you kind of, I think, as you break this down into other applications outside the military, then our court, our legal system will get involved. Is it appropriate for this not to be held transparent? We're seeing this right now with TikTok, right? Honestly, the number one thing that frustrates me, well, a ton of things frustrate me about TikTok and the president's approach to this, but the one that worried me the most was after the initial inspection by the NCRI, the think tank in New Jersey at Rutgers, TikTok's response was to block anyone else from properly assessing, how the algorithm performed. Generally when you do that, I assume your algorithm's evil, right? Because if I find something wrong, I call you on it, and your natural response is to reduce your transparency, you're probably hiding something. And I think we've come to understand that's what's going on there. So to take it to your step further, if the military's using it, it's up to the military's responsibility to unwrap that, and they do that for every weapon system. But if it's being used broadly, if a wrapper's being used broadly to apply to something that affects the public, then I think they have to have the appropriate transparency, and I think our legal system's going to have to solve that, which means a lot of education for judges, because I would say that has not been one of the ABA, the American Bar Association's, like measures of whether someone will be a good judge, as if they, basically turning their computer on passes the test. which is not enough for these complex issues. All right, I know we're at the end of time, but I wanted to give the two of you a half a minute each. Any final thoughts? And Matt, we'll start with you.
Oh, look, no. I'd rather hear what Leah has to say.
Leah,
First of all, I would
you
say-
get a whole minute.
I'll learn more.
There we go.
In 3 years, when you graduate, you should come work for the government and also open source. But my last concluding thought is that we can sit here and talk about all the horror stories and all the worst case scenarios. But when thinking about American competitiveness and how we win against our adversaries, is we need to become the country that has the best use cases of AI domestically, and how we show that we can use AI to increase the standard of living for all Americans. So this is an area where we need to invest in heavily.
Well, after 59 minutes and 20 seconds of negative thoughts, I'm not sure that 10 seconds is going to close the deal for everybody. But if we could give Matt and Leah a round of applause for this.